Concern Ethiopia's decision to expel UN staff could impact aid operation. Guinea's coup leader sworn in as president. What next for Conakry? Merck says COVID-19 pill cuts risk of death and hospitalization by half. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Egypt taps into international bond market for a second time this year. And Kenya's Olympics body heads to the polls after extraordinary session. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with me for this hour. Let's begin with news out of Ethiopia. The UN Security Council has held a closed-door meeting to discuss the expulsion of 7 of its staff members by the Ethiopian government. The 7 officials were accused of meddling in the country's internal affairs. In a letter to the Security Council, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the global organization would push Ethiopia to permit the affected staff to resume their duties in Ethiopia. Ethiopia's mission to the UN is, however, reported to have urged the global body to replace the expelled personnel. This, it said, will allow the continuation of cooperation in providing humanitarian assistance. On Friday, the UN chief expressed full confidence in the expelled staff, saying all personnel are guided by impartiality, neutrality. Ethiopia has accused humanitarian workers of supporting the Tigray forces fighting its soldiers.
At this point today, we know that the needs are great. I think that from this podium, we keep highlighting almost on a daily basis the plight of the population affected by the conflict in Ethiopia and how important access is. I think yesterday we had also some updates on numbers and how much more access we need. The work of the Secretary General continues. As he said, he's shocked by the news today. The humanitarian work by the UN is impartial. It's important. It needs to continue. We need and we hope to be able to continue this important work over there.
Let's turn our attention to Guinea now, where the country's military ruler, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, has been sworn in as interim president. Colonel Doumbouya has been inaugurated by judges of the country's Supreme Court in accordance with a transition charter released by the military junta earlier this week. He will serve as transitional president before the country returns to civilian rule, but said he will not participate in elections after the transitional period. Doumbouya has vowed to oversee the transition administration, which has the mandate to draft a new constitution, fight corruption, make electoral reforms, and hold elections. Mamadi Doumbouya led a coup in the country back in September. The coup saw the overthrow of 83-year-old President Alpha Conde.
Moi, Mamadi Doumbouya,
I swear before the people of Guinea to preserve national sovereignty in all loyalty, to respect and ensure respect for the provisions of the Transitional Charter, human dignity, the laws and regulations of the Republic, to fulfill my duties in the best interests of the nation, and to consolidate the democratic gains, to guarantee the independence of the country and the integrity of the national territory. I solemnly commit myself on my honor to collaborate with the organs of the transition for the achievement and preservation of national cohesion.
The transition will follow the path of a new constitution, and this will restore constitutional order in the country. As lawyers, we want to be in a state governed by the rule of law, where the state is subject to the law. And after having heard and analyzed the speech of the president and the new head of state, we have been assured that the state will follow the law.
Well, joining us for more on these we are joined by African Affairs analyst Achike Ochude. Achike, welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for joining us here on the program. Well, Guinea's military ruler has been sworn in as president despite international objection. What message is this sending to the international community?
I think when a military coupist sends this kind of message, I think it's essentially trying to tell the international community that they cannot do anything to him. And I think he gets his strength for that attitude, especially basically from the internal dynamics of Guinea after the coup, a coup that has been largely accepted and applauded by the people of Guinea, most unfortunately, really. Even the traditional antagonist of military intervention in democratic societies, the civil society, would seem to be very supportive of the coup in Guinea. Obviously, as a result of the failure of the civilian, president under Alpha Conde, and so, unlike the situation that we had in Mali, where Goita found it very difficult to midwife a transitional arrangement, simply because there was a very strong opposition on ground in Mali that kicked against his further, his headship of any interim transitional arrangement. We do not have the same situation in Guinea, with the vast majority of people being supportive of the coup. It becomes very difficult for the international community to move against Guinea. So if we had a opposition really to that coup internally, within Guinea, then it becomes a basis for the international community to engage, with the coupists and look for a way out of the situation. And so that's what essentially what he's telling the international community is that as long as the Guinean people are behind him, he has nothing to worry about, and there's nothing they can do.
All right, Chike, we'll talk more about that a little later. But that brings me to my next question. Are targeted sanctions and suspensions of countries from some regional bodies do not seem to be discouraging coup plotters, as you've said. Why is that the case?
Yeah, because the sanctions are not, biting. If they were biting, especially if they were very effective against the participants in some of these military interventions, you would obviously then I think that would have a telling effect. But what you see really would seem to be a sanctioning, or an acceptance of this behavior that is an aberration to democracy. Because of course we know that even the act of coup making itself or coup plotting in itself is a treasonable offense in most countries. I mean everywhere. Under a military dispensation, when a coup takes place, the punishment really is death. So under a civilian administration, if it fails, it is a serious punishment. But what has happened, I think, over time is the attitude, just like you said, of the international organizations. They have not been able to actually find the right formula to deal with these people, to make sure that they are punished. But you see the arrangements that they have in place ends up rewarding the coupists. Look at Mali, for instance. Look at Chad and some of these other places. Ultimately, the arrangements that they have in place has a way of getting the same people who were involved in abrogating their country's constitution, being involved again in the government, in the transitional government that will lead to a new political arrangement, which they cut off in the first place. So it is this feeling that they are being rewarded for bad behavior that seems to have emboldened other people. And then, of course, the sanctions. If you target the country itself, it's not the members of the junta that are going to feel the effect. It is the ordinary people. And that's why they have carried on as if nothing is going to happen. And that's why others seem to have been emboldened.
All right, Chike, thank you for your insights. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you for your time here on Africa Live. We'll talk to you again soon. Now, let's revisit our top story on Ethiopia, where the UN Security Council has held a closed-door meeting to discuss the expulsion of 7 of its staff members by the Ethiopian government. The 7 officials were accused of meddling in the country's internal affairs. Let's bring in CGTN's Gurun Chala in Addis Ababa for more on this. Gurun, welcome to the program. Gurun, what has led to this escalation of tension with the UN? Well, we seem to have lost Gurun Chala. We apologize for that break in communication. Hopefully we'll get him with clear sound a little later before the show ends. Let's turn our attention to Nigeria. Now, it's 61 years since the country gained its independence from British colonial rule, and a ceremony to mark the nation's biggest official holiday was held in the country's capital, Abuja. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam brings us highlights from the ceremony. Let's take a listen.
It's the customary 21-gun salutes, synchronized parade by Nigeria's armed forces, followed by a cultural and acrobatics display symbolizing Nigeria's rich cultural heritage, all part of activities at the nation's 61st independence anniversary.
We are still together as a nation. It's a big achievement. There are certain countries that have not experienced the kind of challenges we have experienced and have fragmented. In the area of infrastructure, we have achieved tremendously well in the last couple of years. Nigerians continue to perform credibly all over the world in different aspects of human endeavor.
But this year's celebration comes with mixed feelings. Africa's most populous nation has been faced with an array of security and economic challenges, from Boko Haram's insurgency, kidnappings and banditry, to inflation, unemployment and infrastructural deficit.
We're not getting it right up to now. We have so many securities that by now we're supposed to have tackled all this. But because of, let me say, interest of some people, either politicians or individual, that Nigeria have actually got it wrong in that aspect.
Every Nigerian should be patriotic. That is the most important thing. If we are all patriotic to our country, we have our country first at heart, Nigeria will be a better place.
Most of the time is leadership. But I know with God helping us, we'll make it right. If we are united with one voice, one heart, one purpose, we'll make Nigeria become great.
The Independence Day ceremony is a reminder of how various regions formed a unifying force to achieve freedom in 1960. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
All right, let's try to get Groom Chala right back on the line again. Groom, hopefully you're there. Thank you for joining us again here on Africa Live. Groom, what has led to the escalation of tensions with the UN?
Richard, as you have said earlier, the United Nations is not happy with Ethiopia's decision of expelling 7 UN aid workers or officials who are based here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and saying that Ethiopia has no legal rights. And also, this is going to affect the humanitarian activity going on in the northern part of the country. Now, Ethiopia is saying that, well, these people, the 7 of them, which are supposed to leave the country perhaps in the next few hours, as the 72 hours time is dwindling as we speak, have been meddling in the internal affairs of the country away from their humanitarian work. So this tension has escalated. The UN asked to the change of mind, change of heart from the Ethiopian side. Ethiopia is saying that it is standing firm. Even in the last night's UN Security Council meeting, the Ethiopian ambassador in New York has said that, well, you can send a replacement, but the people who have been expelled are not going to be reinstated because they have breached the country's law, and this is a sovereign country and it should be respected. So I think this tension might continue as Ethiopia is standing firm, and the UN is also assisting, of course, with the United States and others that this change of heart and mind should come. So we have to wait and see, Richard, if there's going to be change, but we do not really think that Ethiopia is going to change its mind of bringing these people back to their jobs.
Right, Groom, you briefly mentioned that the tensions are likely to impact operations of humanitarian organizations. Can you expand on that, please?
Absolutely. Well, as you understand, in the northern part of the country, as war is continuing, the humanitarian situation is not worse not only in the Tigray regional state, but in the Afar and Amhara regional states, as many people are also falling in the hands of aid workers or everyday supply of aid for their survival. So these officials, which belong to the UN, have been facilitating one way or another for the delivery of this aid. But the Ethiopian government is saying that, well, we have been jointly working with the UN, and aid work can continue without these people who are accused of meddling in the internal affairs of the country. But we should also understand, Richard, that every day the humanitarian situation or aid delivery is being also affected because of uh, situations like lack of trucks which are delivering food to the northern part of the country. Many of them, again, according to the government, have entered Tigray and never returned. And that has created this big shortage. Although there are food supplies in different warehouses across the country, delivering food is an issue because of transportation. So these and also the current situation could affect or perhaps worsen the humanitarian situation. But the Ethiopian government is saying that work can be done with the UN staff available at the moment at hand if the truck problem is solved.
Well, thank you for the update. I guess there's no more questions to ask regarding the humanitarian situation, but is there more that the government can do, in your opinion?
Well, for the moment, what we understand is the government's work of delivering food is going to continue. The UN is also insisting that it should continue its job with the current stuff available at the moment. But every day, food delivery is done with the government's effort because there is an organization dedicated to do humanitarian work in the country. And also the UN is an additional important hand to do that. So this joint work should continue, but Ethiopia's authorities are insistent that they can also do the job with the help of the international community if the country's law is respected. So these two important things must come together so that the humanitarian delivery can be orchestrated as it's going to help the people on the ground who are affected by this war.
All right, Groom Chala, thank you for your insight and analysis. Let's leave it there for now. Time now for a short break. You're watching Africa Live. Don't go away. Here's what's ahead. The COVID death toll in the United States reaches a grim milestone despite widely available vaccines. And Africa fails to meet 10% vaccination target set by the WHO. We'll tell you more.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa's real friends are those bridging the infrastructure deficit. China is doing exactly that through the Belt and Road Initiative. Roads, rail, sea and airports are opening up Africa. A clarion call to friends of Africa. Hard infrastructure is what we need to get out of poverty. BRI African Voices.
We love the trade. We love China.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for sticking with us. The United States has reached another grim milestone in the fight against COVID-19. The number of deaths due to the coronavirus has topped 700,000. The death toll is larger than the population of Boston. Driven by the fast-spreading Delta variant, the U.S. lost 100,000 lives in the past 3.5 months. The New York Times reports the vast majority of those had not been vaccinated. Only 3,000 had been identified as having the shot so far. An estimated 70 million eligible Americans remain unvaccinated. Still on the U.S. pharmaceutical company Merck, it says it'll soon seek regulatory approval for its oral pill for COVID-19 after promising data. The company says the drug known as molnupiravir reduced hospitalizations and deaths by 50% in people recently infected with the coronavirus. It's designed to introduce errors in the genetic code of the virus. If it gets authorization, the drug would be the first oral antiviral medication for COVID-19. Merck says it plans to make regulatory applications worldwide. While scientists hail it as a huge advance, they also stress the drug is not a miracle cure and should complement highly effective vaccines rather than replacing them. Well, the pandemic is now the deadliest in America's history, surpassing the 1918 flu. Some frontline workers say the death toll in many cases is avoidable. Karina Huber has more.
The 1918 influenza pandemic was far deadlier for Americans on a per capita basis. But experts say many of the COVID-19 deaths could have been prevented because, unlike 1918, we now have vaccines to protect against severe infection.
Given the large amount of adults in America today who are still unvaccinated, and those are the ones who are getting sickest and dying in this latest wave, we did not have to see this.
The majority of recent fatalities have occurred in Texas and Florida, where vaccine hesitancy is relatively high. The two states combined account for roughly a third of all COVID-19 deaths in the United States right now. Intensive care units are seeing greater numbers of younger patients than earlier in the pandemic. The majority of those patients are unvaccinated.
I leave 2 weeks to go to stupid Chicago for a wedding. I was the best man. Had to go. I flew. I get back 2 days, 3 days later, and I come back with the stupid COVID.
Many U.S. healthcare workers who have been treating COVID-19 patients for more than 18 months say they feel burnt out.
It's just terrible to see younger people this time around. They have children, so it's just been difficult in that aspect, emotionally, physically. It's just been a lot.
Children are also finding themselves in the hospital at greater rates than before, in part because Delta is far more contagious than previous variants.
Anyone could walk in a children's hospital today and see the dramatic impact that COVID and the Delta variant have made on children and adolescents, some with underlying medical conditions, some without. No age group has been spared.
A nurse in a COVID-19 ward at a Florida hospital said she had one wish.
It's depressing, and I wish everybody would get vaccinated so we don't have to keep doing this.
According to the CDC, roughly 25% of those eligible for COVID-19 vaccines have not yet received a shot. Public and private sector businesses have begun implementing vaccine mandates to compel more Americans to get inoculated. Health experts say that's the only way to prevent mass hospitalizations and preventable deaths. Karina Huber, CGTN.
Africa has failed to meet its target of fully inoculating at least 10% of the continent by the end of September. The global goal was set in May by the World Health Assembly, the world's highest health policy setting body. CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy reports.
Wycliffe Muganga is a businessman in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Muganga, like many other people in Africa, made an early decision to get vaccinated. But vaccine shortage on the continent has not made it easy.
I'm a businessman who travels quite often, and there's a likelihood I could contract the coronavirus. That is why I wanted to get vaccinated, but I have failed to get the vaccine.
According to the World Health Organization, only 15 African countries out of 54 met the set target of inoculating 10% of their population.
Clearly, the consequence will be the continuation of transmission across the countries and delaying the reopening of economy, delaying reopening of schools, and getting back to a normal lives in many places. So the real strong appeal here is to accelerate the pace of vaccine rollout in the continent.
WHO says countries that met the goal have a relatively small population, with 40% being small island developing states. Sufficient vaccine supplies saw countries like Mauritius and Seychelles vaccinating over 60% of their population, while countries in southern Africa like Zimbabwe and Botswana have fully vaccinated 14% of their population.
As a self-financing country, Botswana sought to secure and procure COVID-19 vaccines using different available platforms. This process began as early as May 2020 and encompasses subscribing to global and regional vaccine access platforms such as the COVAX and AVAT facilities.
As of September 30th, a total of 79.15% of Africa's vaccine supply has been administered. 6.67% of the continent's total population received at least one dose. 4.30% of Africa's 1.3 billion population are fully inoculated. WHO's target is to fully vaccinate 40% of Africa's total population by the end of the year. Daniel Arab Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Somalia has launched its first public oxygen plant in the capital, Mogadishu. The new plant will be used to help the country combat COVID-19. The oxygen plant, costing $240,000 comes amid a severe shortage of oxygen in the country. According to the chairman of the Hermud Salam Foundation, the charitable organization that purchased the new plant, Somalia's health sector will be able to save over $2 million annually. The foundation pledged to help in the operation of the new plant by hiring and training engineers. According to Johns Hopkins University data, Somalia currently has nearly 20,000 COVID-19 cases and over 1,100 deaths. The country's Ministry of Health says only about 1.4% of the population is vaccinated, making it one of the countries with the lowest vaccination rates.
It is going to be a big relief for us. The entire country and the capital in particular depended on one private oxygen plant, which itself is small. It could not satisfy the needs of our public hospital like Martini, where most people sought health services from when they feel they have COVID-19 symptoms. Other private hospitals also depended on that plant for oxygen, since they could also admit patients suffering from COVID-19 or related complications that will force patients to receive oxygen. So the new plant in the capital will be very helpful. We wish to have other oxygen plants in the coming months. They will be installed in Mogadishu and their regions as well.
This plant will produce 144 cylinders with each cylinder containing 50 liters of oxygen. In a week, it can produce about 108 cylinders of oxygen with each cylinder containing 50 liters.
China's outbound direct investment into countries involved in the Belt and Road Initiative increased in the first 5 months of this year. According to the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, during this period, investment into the BRI countries expanded 13.8% year on year to $7.43 billion. Construction projects in these countries span railways, ports, highways, and other infrastructure. In Egypt, Yasser Hakim looks at how space technology has become one form of cooperation.
Egypt has been a focal point of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese investments in the country have exceeded $7 billion, while trade is over $13 billion. Tens of Chinese factories have been established in the last few years, as well as huge infrastructure and construction projects, like the iconic tower, the business district at the new capital, as well as renewable energy and railway projects. Chinese cooperation in Egypt lately is not just only in infrastructure and construction, but it has also expanded to another sector, working with the Egyptian Space Agency. The chief of Egypt's space agency says the North African country is the largest foreign recipient of Chinese funding for space technology at about $100 million.
There are two huge bilateral projects in the space field. The first is the Satellite Assembly, Integration and Test Center. The second project is producing with China a huge 350-kilogram remote sensing satellite, which we started in September 2019, and we have nearly finished the third and final stage of construction.
50 Chinese experts are in Egypt working on the two projects, which will help in areas of sustainable development, such as fighting desertification, locating underground water resources, and improving the environment. Space technology has become an important aspect of the Belt and Road Initiative.
We are offering China the chance to assemble its satellites for African countries in our well-equipped assembly center. So, this center will complement and strengthen Sino-African space cooperation. We are also offering the educational satellite we developed for China to use it with African countries based on the Belt and Road Initiative.
That's not all. The Egyptian and Chinese governments are expected to sign an agreement to elevate space technology cooperation into a strategic partnership level. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The news continues on Africa Live. Time now for our business segment. Here's what's ahead. Egypt taps into the international bond market for a second time this year. South Africa's Mpumalanga province to soon boast the highest skywalk in the world.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. We appreciate your company. Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg joined activists from around the world for a Fridays for Future march in Milan as environment ministers met ahead of Glasgow's COP26. The young climate champions, inspired by Thunberg, marched peacefully through the streets of Milan to demand policymakers match rhetoric with action and stump up the billions of dollars needed to wean the world off fossil fuels to cleaner energy during a year that has seen record-breaking heat waves, floods, and fires. The proposals of the young activists include a transparent climate finance system, sustainable and responsible tourism, and the phasing out of the fossil fuel industry by 2030, which they want to be included in the agenda for the November COP26 meeting. Oh, let's turn our attention to Egypt, which has tapped international markets for $3 billion denominated bonds. Now, this is its second Eurobond issuance of the year, joining a rush of emerging market governments taking advantage of low borrowing costs before the U.S. Federal Reserve starts tapering its pandemic stimulus. Yasser Hakim is with the details.
The $3 billion issuance was 3 times oversubscribed by foreign investors. It follows another oversubscribed $3.8 billion Eurobond issuance earlier in the year.
Egypt's strong economic showing, financial footing, and strong future outlook by international organizations give us support to easily cover the bond issuances. The money will be spent on basic necessities such as the ongoing national and developmental projects, as well as paying off other foreign debt in dollars.
The government has been aggressively tapping different borrowing mechanisms from the IMF and World Bank to euro, dollar, and green bonds. Some fear this quick accumulation of international debt can be harmful to the economy, but others have calmed those fears.
احنا النهارده كان طول عمرنا مصر كانت بتصدر سندات.
Egypt used to issue short and medium-term bonds from 5 to 10 years. Now we issue 30 and 40-year bonds. These long-term bonds with high foreign investor demand are proof of confidence in the Egyptian economy and less burden on state budget. In 2017, the debt, local and foreign, reached 105% of GDP. Recently, although we keep issuing bonds and taking loans from the IMF, but our debt to GDP is down to 92%. This shows that our GDP is quickly rising in the last few years.
The government is still going to tap the international market again. It had approved plans to issue a still undisclosed amount of Islamic Sukuk bonds for the first time, expected before end of the year. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
World Bank President David Malpass has been in Sudan for the first visit by the bank in nearly 40 years. He praised the country's reforms but cautioned against what he called political slippages. A transitional government and a civilian military sovereign council have been running the African nation since 2019 after the ouster of longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir. Naba Muhyiddin has more from Khartoum.
Sudanese Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok welcomed the delegation and described the visit as a historic one.
We are very delighted and honored to see you coming to see us at this very historic moment in the country's history. We are also delighted that you have chosen to deliver your speech, annual speech for the world, from our capital, Khartoum.
Under Bashir, Sudan endured decades of corruption and strict U.S. sanctions. The United States removed Sudan from its state sponsor of terrorism blacklist in December 2020, eliminating a major hurdle to much-needed aid and financial investment. The new government made solid economic reforms to meet the international financial institutions' requirements to access aid and investments. Malpass said Sudan's transitional government inherited a deeply damaged economy and society that has suffered decades of conflict and isolation. He said it faced extraordinary headwinds. He also praised the transitional government's economic reforms.
Sudan is building a nation is going to be stronger than the individual parts. And that's important as people see the supply increase and the shortages go down. That can happen in other areas of the economy. And as that happens, investment will come. One of the things that strikes me is the availability of investment from Sudanese people who are living abroad. They're watching the developments. They are very pleased and very proud to see the country move toward a peaceful nation. And so we are here today to strongly encourage that process, recognizing that it's hard and that it takes time.
Sudan has over $50 billion in foreign debt. The tumbling economy is now awaiting debt relief through the so-called Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, HEPIC initiative, in order to recover. Naba Muhyiddin, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
Nigeria has recorded its highest export of agro-food items in the second quarter of 2021, and that's according to data from the country's Bureau of Statistics. The total value of exports of agricultural products rose to $403 million. But as CGTN's Deji Badamus reports, there is still a downside for Nigeria as agro-imports still outpace exports.
The agricultural export figures from the National Bureau of Statistics is perhaps a pointer that the government's aggressive policy on agriculture is yielding results. The $403 million export is a 112% increment over the $189.5 million recorded in the same period last year, and 30% higher than the $309 million recorded in the first quarter of this year.
The current government has made significant efforts to see that we revamp the agro sector, so that we can feed ourselves as well as earn more revenue in order to, supplement what we get from oil.
Nigeria's leading agri exports are cocoa and cashew nuts, accounting for approximately $153 million and $105 million respectively. Adeyemi Adeniji, who is one of the leading exporters of the products, says the country could actually do better than the statistics show.
What you have just seen is that people have started changing their attitude towards export. In actual sense, what you only see is it might have grown marginally because of the perpetual poverty that driving people to look inward. What we have abandoned before, we are looking at it now, but it is still less than 10% of our capacity.
But while Nigeria's agric export is growing, so is the country's agric import. The report from the Statistics Bureau shows agric import for Q2 2021 rose 56.9% year-on-year to a high of about $1.6 billion, creating a massive trade deficit of approximately $1.18 billion and literally eroding the gains that have been made.
You can't have a balance when you have the kind of population that we have, vis-a-vis the amount of food we're trying to produce to feed local consumption. So there's going to be a disproportion in the value of what you are exporting and the value of what you are importing.
The basic thing is this: our agricultural export is not value added. We're basically exporting raw agricultural products. And so there is no benefication. And there is no country that has become an industrialized country by exporting or producing only basic food items or what you call extractive industry products. Countries develop because they're able to add value to whatever is produced, whatever raw material they have in their country.
The huge deficit means despite the positive growth in Nigeria's agric export, the country still has a lot of ground to cover to narrow the trade gap. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
South Africa is ramping up efforts to make the country a key tourist destination. Several popular attractions and historic locations are being either revamped or renovated to provide more memorable experiences. God's Window in the eastern part of the country's Mpumalanga province will soon boast the highest skywalk in the world. CGTN's Richard Nta tells us more.
After 7 years of financial modeling, a groundbreaking ceremony was finally held to mark the official start of construction. In just over a year's time, the famous God's Window will have a new skywalk over 1 kilometer above the ground and 12 meters out.
The brief basically was that they want a skywalk at God's Window, with some restaurants and things like that. We took that basic brief and gave it a bit of a facelift. We actually decided to, instead of going halfway with this project, to actually put a world-class facility there at God's Window.
God's Window gets its name from the breathtaking view of the Lowveld that stretches over 900 meters down into an indigenous forest-clad valley, making the region one of South Africa's most popular wildlife attractions.
There's been a lot of work in terms of getting the investors to come to the fore and also engaging with the CPAs which are around this community and also our traditional leaders and the local community members, so that at the end of the day, as we are going to put this investment within their shores, they must take ownership and they must be part of this initiative.
$32 million has been invested in building the sky bridge that will offer visitors a panoramic view through a cantilevered glass walkway suspended off the edge of the cliff.
Even providing more offerings for visitors, like the sky swings that will swing across the sort of edge of the cliff, absorbing those balls that people climb in water ponds, just roll around, and a curated craft market as well.
It's hoped the new development will improve tourism, support the local community, and create jobs.
10% must go to our local communities. We'll then move on to them benefiting about 30%. The lifespan of the investors in this project, it is estimated to be within 27 years. Then the project will then be officially handed over to the communities of this area, which as government we are saying we need to develop our communities and make sure that we empower them.
The skywalk is expected to be completed by mid-2023. Richard Nta, CGTN, in Mpumalanga, South Africa.
Time now for a short break. Stay tuned. Here's what's coming up. Remember the starving lions in Sudan that went viral a year ago? Well, life has dramatically changed for them. We'll tell you more.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Welcome back to Africa Live. 1 year ago, a lioness named Kandaka was starving along with 4 other lions in a Sudanese government zoo. Her photo was taken by a visitor and went viral, and her plight was widely reported. Now, one visitor has since then helped change the lives of Kandaka, the lioness, and other animals he rescued. Naba Muhaddin has more from Khartoum.
Lioness Kandaka lives a happy life with her 3 cubs. But it hasn't always been this way. The shocking images of Kandaka starving in a government facility inspired the setting up of a new wildlife center in Sudan. Across 10 acres, some 20 kilometers away from the capital Khartoum, Saleh Uthman launched the center to rescue Sudanese animals from death and negligence.
We established Sudan Animal Rescue Center after we found that the animals at Al Karashi Park need care. They need a wider and more comfortable place. So we made this center for all other animals coming from different places.
Sudan has one of the biggest nature reserves in Africa, but due to negligence, many of the species have reached endangered status. The government says it can't afford to feed the animals. After rescuing the starving lions, Saleh also moved other endangered animals to the center, including hyenas, birds, and monkeys. Many experts and amateurs voluntarily joined the initiative, and international organizations sent rescue teams to help out. The center receives visitors of all ages and aims to raise people's awareness about Sudanese animals.
What Uthman made is an amazing thing. It's something Sudan has needed for a long time. I hope that Uthman will carry on this project.
After Kandaka moved to the new center, she put on weight and delivered 3 healthy cubs in this month.
From a starving lioness to a mother of healthy cubs, Kandaka lives happily in Sudan's Animal Rescue Center with her fellow lions.
The visitors couldn't hide their impression of the change the lions had witnessed.
We entered the park, and the first thing that intrigued us were the pictures of the lions, the way they looked when they were found, and the way they look now. It is nearly impossible.
Saleh hopes to protect more Sudanese animals, saving them from suffering and even possible extinction. Naba Muhaddin, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
Healthcare workers in Nigeria are calling for the government to do more as the country battles thousands of cholera deaths and infections this year. Community members are reporting a lack of clean drinking water as the main cause of outbreaks. Correspondent Tessa McKenday reports from Jos.
David Amodu is a medical doctor and member of a non-governmental organization. He is involved in the hand-washing campaign as a result of cholera outbreaks in the Utan community in Jos, north central Nigeria.
So in Plateau State, we had about 1,000 cases in the last 9 months. And then 2 months ago, we had about 290 cases. And then in the Utan community, about 5 cases have been reported. And sadly, these individuals lost their lives. So it's really a burden to the community because you have people who are supposed to go about their livelihoods, who are supposed to be productive in the community, but because of cholera, they cannot.
Nigeria's Center for Disease Control says cholera has killed over 2,300 people this year alone. It has infected over 60,000 more, mostly children. It's Nigeria's worst cholera outbreak since 2017. The disease is caused by contaminated water, illicit waste disposal, and poor sanitation. If untreated, it can lead to death. Members of this community say they don't have access to clean drinking water. A nearby stream is their only source of water. They use it to both wash and drink from, leaving them vulnerable to cholera.
A major challenge in the community is the problem of water. And then you would see people coming to streams and going to some sources that are not good to get water. So this is a major predicament in the community.
Medical experts are calling on the government and other non-governmental organizations to engage in campaigns about proper hygiene. But providing access to safe water is even more urgent.
I think the first thing government can do is to provide adequate water supply for individuals in the community. That means by means of provision of boreholes for communities who do not have access to good drinking water, to make sure that sewage does not get access to water bodies that people use.
The government says it has adopted several measures to tackle cholera in the country. The Nigerian Center for Disease Control has activated national cholera emergency operation centers in several parts of the country. The centers are to support states to ensure a coordinated, rapid and effective response to the ongoing outbreak. It is hoped that these efforts will be enough to tackle the rising cholera deaths in the country and curb its spread among citizens. Tessa McKenday, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Don't go away. Stay tuned. Here's a peek at the headlines. Kenya's Olympic body heads to the polls after extraordinary session.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa.